A lot of talk on the Twitter sphere this weekend about tiers in the Big Ten. Who are amongst the Big Ten big boys? Who's on the bottom looking up at everybody? Let's take a look. I'm going to put all the Big Ten teams into a hierarchy. 5 tiers. Let's take a look. All right, I don't think there's any doubting who's in tier number 1 all by themselves. It's Ohio State, right? They put big-time players into the NFL. They recruit at an elite national level with SEC football teams. They get into the college football playoff. Heck, they even got a national championship dating back about, 8 years ago or so now. So Ohio State, no question about it, in a tier all by themselves, not much else to say. Let's move on to tier 3. Now things are about to heat up. Michigan and Penn State. Okay, that's my next tier. When I look at Michigan, and when I look at really both of these teams, these are the teams in recent memory, one, to defeat Ohio State in the Big Ten, and number 2, win Big Ten titles. That's a big thing for me. Both of these teams have been fairly competitive with Ohio State. Now, there's going to be blowouts in there, right? Ohio State is such a great program. I'm not saying it's close every year. You can go back and look at the stats, okay? What I am here to say is Penn State has competed with Ohio State within the last 5 or 6 years. Michigan has competed and beaten them. Both of these teams have beaten Ohio State. Both of these teams are within reaching distance of Ohio State in terms of recruiting. Nobody else really can say that. So when I look at both Michigan and Penn State, Big Ten champions, recruiting is there. You can say what you want about Michigan, especially in the years past before this season, but the Michigan program is on an upward trajectory, right? They got a lot of great players returning this year. I know the flirting with the NFL thing with Jim Harbaugh is not a great look for the program, but hopefully that's all figured out, at least for the time being. But then when I look at Penn State, and I look at James Franklin and his program. They're putting kids in the NFL. You look at Saquon Barkley. You look at Jahan Dotson. You look at Micah Parsons. They're putting first-round draft picks into the National Football League, and they're producing great talent. Recruiting really took a step up this past year. I believe they finished 7th or 8th in high school recruiting in the country. Nick Singleton is going to be an impact player, running back. Drew Aller might be their next quarterback, a guy that can really take the program to new heights. So that is kind of why I put those 2 teams in tier number 2. It'll help me explain those 2 teams in tier number 2 as I kind of go along in this list. Tier number 3, Iowa, Michigan State, Wisconsin. Okay, this is kind of the tier where it's almost. You know, those other 2 teams, Michigan and Penn State, have won a Big Ten championship recently. All these other teams, Wisconsin, Michigan State, Iowa, they've been really close to getting to the Big Ten championship, for those teams that haven't. And when they've gotten to the Big Ten championship, they just haven't been there enough to knock off an elite team like Ohio State. All 3 of these teams, as of right now, are very good at developing talent. They just don't recruit on a level like a Michigan or a Penn State currently. Wisconsin is as good as anybody at developing talent, taking 3-star guys, heck, 2-star guys, and putting them into a system and developing them and creating NFL draft picks. They've got a hard-nosed defense, running game. They have an identity, much like Iowa. In this same tier, they're never going to recruit top 10, maybe even top 15 high school classes. That's not who they are. Michigan State not included in this current conversation. Wisconsin and Iowa never going to be there, but they're going to do what they do. They're going to develop players for their system. When I look at Michigan State, right, Mel Tucker, in the short time that he's been there, has elevated this program to new heights. That is the program, probably out of all the programs in the Big Ten, ever since the transfer portal came into being, Mel Tucker has taken advantage of it more than any other coach in the conference, right? This is back-to-back years, you can argue, with Nebraska this year, but back-to-back years where they've been towards the top team in terms of a transfer class in recruiting. Look what happened with Kenneth Walker last year. They might have a couple of guys this year that can get to a level where Kenny Walker was a year ago. And then look at them before Mel Tucker, right? This isn't just some flash in the pan. They just came out of obscurity. Mark D'Antonio was great. They went to a college football playoff. What was that, 2015, right? So this is a program that I think has the recent record to be able to be put into this tier. This isn't something where Tucker just came in and all of a sudden, here we go, 1 year, and all of a sudden putting them into that tier. This is a pattern. I think Michigan State is there as a program, and Mel Tucker has just risen it back to that level. And of course, Wisconsin and Iowa, that consistency, especially the Hawkeyes, special teams and defense. You can always count on 7-8 wins by the Iowa Hawkeyes, right? You never really see them dip down to 3 wins, 4 wins, or anything like that. You see them, of course, come up to a 10-win season, but you never see them dip down. Same with the Wisconsin Badgers, a model of consistency. So that's tier number 3. Tier number 4, Minnesota, Purdue, Nebraska, Northwestern, and I threw in Indiana. 5 teams into tier number 4. Let's kind of take a look quickly at all of them. First, let's start with Indiana and Tom Allen. I was debating putting them into the lowest tier, but then I looked at, 2020 was a good year. They've had some good years, some 7-8 wins under Tom Allen before that. I think they're probably one of the lower teams in this tier. They've really rebounded since Tom has come on campus. Before that, you could probably put them in that bottom tier. Tom has gotten them out of that basement tier and into tier number 4 here. They've done a pretty solid, you look at recruiting, high school and transfer recruiting, Tom Allen's doing some things. It wouldn't surprise me for them to sneak up on a good team this year and knock them off. Tom Allen is doing some things. Took a dip down, injuries, of course, and a lot of other things last season, but it wouldn't surprise me to see them. I'm not saying they're going to contend. They're not going to contend in the East Division. But it wouldn't surprise me to see them jump up and bite a team. No question about that. Let's talk about Minnesota. Right, Minnesota has one of those rare things in college football. When you hear something, you immediately identify which brand and which team that goes along with. When you hear row the boat, PJ Fleck, Minnesota. They have a national brand. Whether you think, I don't know, that's all weird, him jumping around and being all excited and motivate and all these speeches and all that stuff. You can think what you want, but he has found a way to identify something nationwide. And he's a marketing genius in that respect. So PJ Fleck has done a great job, obviously, with Minnesota. That 11-win season back in 2019. Last year seemed like a disappointment here in the Twin Cities for Minnesota, right? Those losses at home to Bowling Green in Illinois, you flip those around and this is a 10-2 football team. He has completely changed what you should expect and what you should think of a Minnesota football program. And, just listening on talk radio on the way to work in the fall, there's a lot more Gophers. There's a lot more Gophers on those Thursdays and Fridays. Even when the Vikings are home and even when the Vikings are doing good, you hear a lot more Gophers. And I think you're going to hear a lot. And he's bringing in better talent. Minnesota, look, that's going to be a program. They're never going to probably get into the top 15, top 20 in recruiting nationally. But PJ is a master at developing talent, and he knows what kind of players he can get and what kind of players that he can develop into his system. Let's talk about Purdue. Let's talk about Jeff Brom, because what he's done in his tenure has been pretty darn good, right? The upset of Ohio State, a few years back, and then obviously last year, those 2 top 5 upsets of Michigan State and Iowa, 2 pretty good teams. He is bringing talent into West Lafayette. You can argue that this year's team is the best since Drew Brees and that bunch went to the Rose Bowl back in the year 2000. The argument can be made. Sure, you've got, 2005 with Kyle Orton where they started off great and then faltered down the stretch. But man, this is a talented team, and to bring this type of talent together in West Lafayette is a credit to Jeff Brom and what he's been able to do. They're putting kids into the NFL, right? You look at Rondale Moore, David Bell, back-to-back wide receivers, highly drafted. Okay, is it a wide receiver factory? Maybe not yet, but I think a lot of people are going to be impressed. Some people nationally are going to be surprised of how Aiden O'Connell plays this season, but this is a Purdue team that's on the way up. I'm looking at this, with a Big Ten West championship this year, I don't think that's enough to vault them into tier number 3, but I think they're at the high end of this tier. When I look at this tier, them in Minnesota are probably 1A and 1B of this tier, looking to possibly make the jump up with a couple of really good years the next few years. Let's talk about Nebraska. When you look at the Huskers, they've fallen on really hard times recently. Ever since they moved on from Bo Pelini, the Mike Riley and Scott Frost eras they're not 500. I mean, that's crazy to think about, that Nebraska has fallen that much. Now, with Mickey Joseph and Mark Whipple and all the things kind of coming together this offseason, it looks like they got probably the most talented team ever since maybe one of those Pelini teams. Things are coming together in Lincoln, Nebraska. They got to get out of their own way. Is that a Scott Frost problem, or have they just been really unlucky? Who knows? We'll see this season, right, with all these adjustments. But the Nebraska brand and the Nebraska program, because that's what we're talking about. We're talking about brands. We're talking about programs. We're talking about recent history, has really taken a big-time hit. Look, this is not a destination for kids anymore. Look, the national championship teams, 1994, 1995, 1997, kids that are coming out of the high schools, kids that are coming out of the transfer portal right now, those kids they don't know. They weren't alive then. Okay, that's the big problem right now, is these kids weren't alive at that moment in time. So they don't know. They don't know the history. So kids from out of state, heck, even kids in state in the Omaha area, they're looking at this and say, oh yeah, it's a 500 team. That's the way they view Nebraska football. So that's really the only spot you can put them in right now. Let's take a look at Northwestern. Northwestern, they go up and down, right? I mentioned consistent teams like Wisconsin, like Iowa. Northwestern isn't that, and it's not necessarily Pat Fitzgerald's fault. It's not necessarily their fault. But when I look at the Northwestern Wildcats, I do see a team that overachieves about every 3 years or so. Right, this is a team that has some years has no business winning 9 games. I think they won 10 games fairly recently. This is a team that can get up to that level because of coaching, because of development, because of what Pat Fitzgerald has done in the groundwork he's laid in Evanston, Illinois. It's hard to win at Northwestern. It always has. You know, for the teams that have performed well, what was that, the early 90s, a team went to the Rose Bowl. You know, you look at some of these teams as of recently that have won 8, 9, 10 games at Northwestern. They got no business doing that. You know, competing with some of the bigger budgets and some of the bigger resources that these bigger Big Ten programs have, but they continue to do it. They continue to be on that level. They stay out of the basement. Heck, they win the division, you know, in some respects. And you got to think Pat Fitzgerald is going to get back up to that level again, but you can always count a Northwestern team about once or twice per graduating cycle to get up to that level to contend in the division, and that's why they are not in Tier 5, and that's why they're in Tier number 4. Let's talk about Tier number 5, the basement of the Big Ten, the placemat, so to speak, where everybody wipes their feet of the Big Ten. Maryland, Rutgers, Illinois. Let's talk first about Illinois. This is a team that was okay, mid-2000s. You know, they were fine. Remember Rashard Mendenhall? Remember Juice Williams? Remember that? Remember that? That was fun. Ever since then, hasn't really panned out for Illinois. They are missing out because when Brett Bielema first came in, he says, I'm going to recruit the state of Illinois. As of now. It's hard to win there. That's another place that's hard to win, right? At least at Northwestern, you're in the Chicago area. You're in a big metro area. Champagne's out. It's outstate, as we call here in Minnesota, out of the Twin Cities. Outstate. It's hard to win. Their tradition there isn't outstanding. It's fine, but it's not like you're out of the metro area, but you got great tradition. You don't. At the University of Illinois, and they've fallen on hard times recently. They haven't been able to get that hire right. It's hard. Like I said, this is not easy for these types of teams that just don't have the investment. And Illinois, when you look at the same time period that we're looking at, Illinois has been right there as one of the top teams in men's basketball. Okay, and you look around, And you think, are the resources going there instead of football? Right now, the success, at least between the lines, it's happening on the men's basketball side, not the football side. Hey, being a hoop school, that's not the worst thing in the world. They're developing great talent on the basketball court, but not so much on the football field. All right, let's talk about Maryland and Rutgers. Before USC and UCLA joined the conference, a week ago, or they will in 2024, those were the newest additions to the conference back in 2014. The Terps and the Knights. These were media market grabs. These were money grabs. This isn't a Nebraska where they're going to come in and compete right away. This wasn't a USC. Oh yeah, they're going to compete. They're going to do really good. No, these were okay programs at best coming into the Big Ten. Rutgers had New York City, Maryland, obviously, Washington, D.C., Baltimore, in that surrounding area. Obviously, Maryland was decent at basketball, but if we're talking about on the football side of things, because that is what we're talking about right now, neither of those teams really had much of any success. And now you put them into one of the best conferences in America, from Rutgers coming from the Big East, and Maryland, coming from the ACC, two conferences that were not that great on the football side of things. The competition goes through the roof. Now, if you take this Maryland team and you put them back in the ACC, I think they're definitely competing at a much higher level. But that's not what happens. You go to the Big Ten, you recruit at a Big Ten level. You're in the ACC, you recruit at an ACC level. Once again, this is going to be hard. It's going to be hard. You can be really good as a team. You can win 7 games, 6, 7 games, maybe sometimes 8 games. But for Maryland to break through with Penn State, Michigan State, Ohio State, Wisconsin, Nebraska, the list goes on and on. I mean, how do you compete with that? When you have the program that they have, it's very difficult. It's very difficult. And that area isn't exactly a riches area in terms of football recruiting. So it's hard. You can't blame them. You can credit Mike Loxley for consistently trying to put up 6, 7 wins. And then you look at Rutgers with Greg Schiano. This wasn't a great program. The only thing they were really known for was being the first team to play a college football game against Princeton all those years ago back in the 1800s. They had a few good years with Greg Schiano in the Big East, but this is not a program that really has anything to really sniff at. This is a Rutgers team that is okay, but once again, they're just going to get buried in the shuffle, especially now with USC and UCLA coming into the conference in a couple of years. You really can't blame them. Somebody needs to be at the bottom. I want to hear your thoughts on this tier list. Do you think I completely screwed it up, or do you think I completely got it right? Somewhere in between. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. I'm Big Ten Ted. We'll see you in the next one.